When Jeffrey Dahmer was 9 years old, he created a game called Infinity Land. Due to the fact that he was so disconnected from his parents and so socially withdrawn from others, Dahmer fantasized about Infinity Land for years, enjoying it by himself and telling nobody. Infinity Land was a game involving stickmen and spirals. The stickmen were lanky, fleshless figures made up of bone who would be annihilated if they came too close to one another. The spirals on the board were tightly drawn, intensely imagined symbols of descent whose ultimate destination? The abyss. The danger in this game was connected to closeness. Any physical contact resulted in complete annihilation of both parties involved, suggesting that physical intimacy between two people was the ultimate disaster, presenting the severest risk. Years later, when Jeffrey was 13, he did share this game with somebody, David Borsvold, a kid in his junior high class who he superficially became close with, who he would consider probably his closest friend. And after sharing the game, ironically, Mrs. Borsvold decided that Jeffrey and David should no longer be friends because Jeffrey was considered to be a dangerous companion. So the friendship came to an abrupt ending, proving Jeffrey right that any closeness resulted in immediate annihilation. The creation of this game is a keyhole into the psyche of a 9-year-old Jeffrey, who at that point had already made the connection that intimate contact was an extreme threat. This might suggest that he was sexually abused as a child early on, and that intimate contact was not only considered dangerous, but a secret. And if the secret gets exposed, it could result in annihilation for both parties. That's often the narrative we see a predator tell a child during sexual abuse, that if you tell anyone, this will kill us both. We also know that Jeffrey had been exposed to an incredible amount of intimate partner violence, and there are many ways that that can affect a child's brain. Research shows that intimate partner violence can have a lasting effect on the brain of a developing fetus, an infant, and a child, especially during the first 5 years of their life. Interaction between caregivers and with caregivers during this very sensitive period establishes a vital learning environment for the child, as well as a primary environmental context. Simply put, an environment like this can cause a child to feel extremely unsafe, which causes them to then further socially withdraw from human contact. In abusive environments such as these, not only are humans considered dangerous to one another, but depending on the dynamic that you witness as a child over and over again, if one person in the dynamic keeps belittling another person and treating them like they're less than human, in the child's psyche, a dynamic begins to form where one is completely dominant and the other is inhuman. Not even a human, just an object for the other person's abuse and pleasure. So as Jeffrey got older, his fantasy world continued to grow, and it began to consist of a dynamic where he himself was in a dominant position and the other person was completely passive to the point where they were not moving. When he was 17, his fantasies consisted of clubbing a jogger over the head so that he could drag the unconscious body, still living, into the forest and have its way with him completely as a dominant force. Somehow in Jeffrey's psyche, the only way to have non-threatening intimacy between two people was to establish a dynamic where one person had complete dominance and the other was so defenseless, unmoving, that they couldn't even fight back. Now we could read that as an adult having complete dominance over a child who was so little and defenseless they couldn't fight back, or we could look at it as one person in a dynamic that Jeffrey watched over and over again in his childhood was extremely dominant while the other was extremely passive. So this calls into question Joyce Dahmer and Lionel Dahmer once again, and what Jeffrey saw over and over again. In our next video, we're going to really look deeply at Jeffrey's relationship with his mother. Many of you think I let Joyce Dahmer off the hook. Think again. I'll see you in part 3.